here from Toronto, Canada, just to talk about farming and the farming industry, and we'll bring it back around to what's happening really with the evolution of farming. So main thing right now, we're just going to go over the the farming industry, the size, the scope, what's happening, how's it evolving in the world, and where it's kind of be going in the future. So really, main thing about farming and what really is the important impact of farming is people and the amount of people that we need to feed. And as of 2001, estimated world population is 7.9 billion people. These are hungry mouths and people that need to eat daily. And according to the World Agriculture Organization, that they predict by 2050, the population will be going up to 9.1 billion people. It's a 34% increase in less than 30 years. And we're really actually seeing more and more of the sort of movement of people into cities. So moreover, the nonstop gallop of urbanization will mean the percentage of city dwellers will rise from the current 49% to 70%. Global food production must likewise adapt to this in order to accommodate this population increase, ensure food security for all, according to the FAO. Currently, we grow enough food to feed 17 billion people, so many of these changes will be in our distribution and actually how we handle our current food distribution and get it out to people's hungry mouths. By increasing production, it's not sufficient to achieve food security, the FAO warns. It must be complemented by policies to enhance access by fighting poverty, especially in rural areas, as well as effective safety net programs. And the numbers speak for themselves. The agricultural sector is a force to be reckoned with. One of the world's top producers of cereal and vegetable crops in the U.S. exports a staggering 118 billion dollars per year, according to Investopedia. While China and India are leaders in crop production, a lot of the yield is distributed domestically, while relieving food security is a top priority. We are an interconnected world that we're an interconnected world that actually care if the butterfly flaps its wings overseas and how it affects the weather on the other side of the world. And more we're seeing opportunity sort of cost aspects in farming, where countries aren't growing for their current population. They're growing what they can export and do the best in their sort of climate. This is quite seen in this graphic here. And then also, if we go around, especially like in Australia, where they have a lot more land for meat production, so they cultivate that a lot more, export that around the world, and this interconnectivity of our food production is becoming more and more apparent. And really, in this current sort of climate, seeing that changes in sort of distribution channels and how that will really affect the food costs and how people eat and how people access food, and where food shortages are now really happening because when the distribution channel around the world gets affected, then the whole supply chain gets affected. So here in Canada, where I'm at, there's about 160 million acres of land used for farming, with about almost 200,000 farms in total. This is reported by Stats Canada. And the 2021 net cash income for Canada farmers is predicted to rise 6.8% to a $17.6 billion industry. Growth in agriculture is a fulcrum to economy's growth worldwide, accounting for roughly 4% of global GDP and more than 25% of the countries in the global south per the World Bank. Since everyone needs to eat, food is a great equalizer. Growth in the farming industry is 2 to 4 times more effective in raising income among the poorest population. And really, as we kind of talked about the butterfly effect, results in labor distribution and 30% rise in food prices since the beginning of the 2020. Really, since inflation compounds by reduced earnings and access to food, we are seeing that around 720 to 811 million people around the world went hungry in 2020, according to the UN report. And this had a lot to do with the government's response to COVID and how locking down and migrant workers weren't allowed to really travel around, and the whole entire distribution channel got affected. Developing nations that received the brunt of the situation, with 67% of farms in Western Kenya reporting a substantial household income reduction as a direct result of the pandemic. Survey conducted by NGO and Farm Africa found. It's a burden the farmers are ill-equipped to bear, the report reads. Half of the interviewees reported that they did not have emergency funds, while 52% of farmers confirmed that they had no capital reserve to support their farming activity. So we are really seeing a huge effect and strain going on into the farming industry, and we're seeing a change and shift in the whole entire landscape of how we are growing and feeding the world. But from all this, though, there is some farming trends that I actually find quite hopeful and really kind of interesting. So really three kind of major farming trends that are happening are rejuvenation practices, and really farmers are going back to soil health. We're seeing a massive technological innovation. And we're seeing the development of smart farming, vertical farming, and while we're also seeing the conglomerate of like large scale sort of farming companies, we are also seeing a decentralization happening in the farming. So micro farms are coming. So really the rejuvenation aspect, and I'm say returning back to investing in the soil, and rejuvenation is gaining traction among farmers who are recognizing the long-term benefits of rejuvenating farms and investing in the value of their land. The report stated, adding that 75% of surveyed farmers added sustainable practices as a management priority, and 49% also indicated that they are willing to adopt cover crops to put greater emphasis on soil health and preserving microbes in the dirt. And we're seeing a lot with like permaculture, and people, instead of just really using the petroleum industry and sort of spraying crops and doing sort of a feeding from the top, actually feeding from the bottom and feeding into the soil, using very old practices and on larger scales. And definitely there's a lot more farm resilience in growing and investing into the soil. We're seeing places where drought or sort of large water are coming through people's lands, and people who are using cover crops or other sort of farming methodologies, they're actually having a resilience against this sort of aspect, as nature constantly changes and you don't really know what your farming season is going to have. That if you invest in the soil, you kind of have diversity of aspect and really build up your nature and your environment around. We're seeing a better yield and more of the main thing is the long-term aspects that this is really talking about here, and that a lot of reports with GMO and spraying and the amount of crops that are growing don't actually, like, if you look at the long-term aspects of, and also the amount of money that goes into just really investing in the soil, producing a great level of microbes, and really having a healthy, diverse soil and crops, you can really be resilient to a lot of the aspects. So we're definitely seeing a trend going to soil rejuvenation, and a lot of farmers out there are really connecting and really just bring back old farming practices, which is really interesting. I mean, this next little aspect of like the technology coming in, it's at sort of this transference part, especially when migrant workers and people aren't really able to come around, but we're seeing a lot of sort of robotics coming into farming. And there is an interesting aspect with that, especially some of these machines here are able to go through using lasers and of sort of sensors to actually spray directly onto the sort of pests or actually give nutrients to soil, and they can sense it, and so they're not just dousing the whole entire crop. So really kind of pinpointing. And looking towards the future, 35% of farms are also concerned about mobilizing the next generation of young farmers and see it as a major challenge to business. Refining farming strategies in light of current and future environmental issues will be a critical and emergent wave of farmers. And the kind of main point there is the youth, and there's not really that sort of, especially in the West, that sort of need for farming, or they see farming as an actual interesting business or a place where they can really kind of sink their teeth into and want to grow into. Farming automation, smart farms using AI, robotics, drones, watering monitors, custom tractors, and computer vision software, which are just a few applications of technology used to automate farming processes according to vacancies technology. These technologies reduce labor costs and time while also meeting the rising demand for food in urban populations. Computer visions, for example, is used to determine where seeds and pesticides should be sprinkled for optimal effect. Machine learning is another intelligent solution that can help eliminate weeds by recognizing undisturbed species and crops. And so like really the Internet of Things too is really coming into play. And there's a worldwide sharing of sort of these technologies, and they're learning together and with the help of actual farmers to actually grow the machines' knowledge and the world's sort of knowledge around urban farming and farming in general. And so one of these aspects of kind of the trends that we're seeing, and this is vertical farming and warehouse farming. And it's kind of like vertical farming relies on water using either hydroponic or aquaponic systems. Aquaponics is using fish as you grow and feed the fish waste is actually used as nutrients for the plants, and the plants clean the water, so you have a full ecosystem. And one main reasons for sort of these sort of large scale warehouses is they reduce up to 70% of the water use, and also almost use nil or zero pesticides. Experts believe that with the use of robotics and automation, vertical farming can alleviate labor shortages. While there are major players in the vertical farming industry, and many people have come to market, there is still a balancing act of having it become profitable. We're seeing tons of investments and tons of sort of these warehouse farms growing, but when it really comes down to is like, does it actually sustain and able to produce a profitable farm? We're seeing major players like Arrow Farm, which is actually a picture of their facility with massive warehouses. The models of using scissor lifts to deal with crops seem to be the tipping point in the manageability of the vertical farm. There are many companies to market right now that have different steps. One thing is clear, that we are going vertical as humans are also going vertical and seeing urban landscape change. Although there are many, I've seen tons and tons of sort of aspects. This is a great rendering of really a place they call ring gardens, and this is actually the most efficient way to grow and use resources, especially if you're going to use lights. Is these ring gardens. So ring gardens, concepts developed by a Romanian architect and Dr. Alexandru Purdue. The ring garden is a floatable solar-powered structure that acts as a rotating aeroponics farm, distilling plants and algae, a bioreactor in one. The garden can produce 16 million gallons of clean water, 40,000 pounds of aeroponic crops, and 11,000 pounds of spirulina biomass. And this really, we're seeing this great infusion of technology and sort of creativity with architecture to actually figure out how we're going to feed this growing population, how we can do it in sort of in alignment with our environment. So these machines here and these sort of, I've seen tons of concepts like this where they really are getting cutting edge and using algae and that sort of stuff, and what we can do to power these machines, and using even the human waste from these buildings to actually take the bio gases and from that to also power other things. So, I mean, if you look at old traditions and more like permaculture aspects of where this system feeds that system, which feeds that system, which feeds that system, and they go around and they feed each other. Currently, right now, we in these large sort of farming industries where they just do monocrops and they just douse it and then sprinkle down more sort of pesticides. They don't work in tandem together. And we're getting a massive issue with gray water, and all these pesticides are going into our water systems and down into the soil. They're not really in tandem with our environment or how Mother Nature works. So we are seeing this sort of aspect of these developments of technology and these crazy, really amazing vertical farms. There's shipping container farms. There's all sorts of ways that we can feed this many people. And like I said at the beginning, we can feed up to 17 billion people currently. So it's just a lot to do with distribution, where all the subsidies are going, and how we actually really look at farming as a whole, to get creative. And I think that this really illustrates the creativity that we can have with farming. And so the next part of like where trends and the trends in the farming part is going is what part I really like, and been doing urban farming for a while and seeing the technology actually go into these micro farms. And we're seeing people and technology that are really coming together, allowing people within their own homes, or like in this this technology is called Farm Shelf. It's from the States. That are fully integrated. So they have the water system, they work with your app, and they work also with the supply chain. So you, instead of having all your crops and everything go into fridges, you can go into those living fridges. And you're seeing people actually taking farming into their own hands too, as there's this divergence and all sorts of stuff happening in our world farming system. There's a massive industry starting to grow and develop around micro farming. There's bug farms happening in people's condos now. There's the other from Opticom, sort of these bookshelf farms that you can grow up to like 700 plants, just same size as a bookshelf, and this can happen right in your condo. And really, when we get that sort of microclimate happening, you can integrate, and like one unit could grow enough, at least leafy greens and vegetables for like a whole entire floor of a condo. And yeah, the technology is really pushing sort of this evolutionary process of how we feed ourselves, and it's not just the food; it's the nutrients in the food and how nutrient dense is our food. And if you grow it and you know you're a farmer and you are the farmer, then the nutrients that you get, what you put in there. So it is quite impressive to me to see how all this is sort of coming to shape. And I mean, this sort of what kind of wrap it up and bring it into a little bit of close is the aspect of sort of the community and how we will unite together in farming. Some also that argue that digital technology in agriculture will help fortify social protection programs, namely with cashless and paperless currency, by eliminating the middleman. Swam, while chairman of the Institute for Integrated Development Studies in Nepal, is one proponent of such a digitalization of our food system. We need a new digital ambition to reflect not just what technology were 10 years ago or today, but where it is going, Wage told the International Food Policy Research Institution. And all the techno regulation hurdles to achieve universal, affordable broadband access, how we leverage that for public provisions and services. To me, this really in the World Unit Forum and what this unit community is about, and this sort of peer-to-peer sort of investing and really bringing in financial capital into the farming sector, or many sectors actually in this World Unit Forum, is kind of alluding to, is that we now with all this sort of technology, all these sort of micro farms, all these sort of like branches, and it's actually really like a tree. It's really flourishing, and all these new sort of creative ideas are coming into market. It's really getting it into the capital and getting it into getting these farmers and these innovation people and entrepreneurs the resources they need to get this stuff to market. And because a lot of these sort of new innovation technologies don't necessarily, I mean, a lot of like we have the few farming large companies. So this is will help decentralize a lot of our farming, give a lot more power to farmers, really allow them to afford what they need ahead of time, and not rely so much on government subsidies, but really allowing people to people to really grow and develop the future and how we actually are going to feed ourselves. And I mean, one of my sort of passions why I went into farming was realizing that we really, if we are not really well fed, it's really hard to do any of the other sort of aspects of life. So if we can really take a hold of our food and farming industries and be consciously aware of who our farmers are and where farmers are getting their foods, and then also on top of being able to fund the next wave, the next solution of farming, I think this is something that we can really kind of benefit from. So again, this is meant to be a short 20-minute presentation, and this shows us where I'm at. If there's any quick questions, anything, what is the next breakthrough in the most people? So I'll just read this out. Thanks, Scott. What's actually most exciting for you being someone who's active in the field? What's the next breakthrough and the most people don't really see who are not in the farming industry? So really, I think yep, the question, the next, I mean, the breakthrough, I think, is really the amalgamation of the technology with the old school practices. I think the reliance and understanding of like just like the petro sort of offshoots of what oil can do to grow. I really would see that kind of breaking down, and like with mycelium and Paul Stamens and like some of these sort of aspects of like soil health, investing in the soil, investing in the water, and like there's a really creative ball game coming into the field. So yeah, I think kind of all those little things I touched on with like that technology coming into play, and these micro farms coming into play. I'm seeing lots of hemp stuff coming into industry. So there's going to be, I think, a really interesting sort of birth. And like, I don't know if you've seen those interesting pictures where it's just like a seed breaking through concrete. I really see we're at that like stage where that seed is in the concrete and it's breaking through into a new paradigm. The biggest risk is us not actually doing anything. I think the Hippocratic Oath, let food be thy medicine and medicine thy food. Especially in the last year, like with the amount of people went starving from our disruption to our distribution channel, and how actually like fragile our whole system is. Like what happened in Texas with our winter crops getting fully wiped out, and like if we don't have that resilience and we don't really actually invest in the soil and really connect to our farmers, the risk is huge. The risk of starvation, really. I mean, that's what food's about, is really if we're not fully understand and informed of our food and what nutrients we're putting in our body and what that has effective on us, or from a risk, starvation, sickness. You recommend a small farm to start up, 3 acres south of Germany. There is so much resources out there, and it's permaculture is, I love it. It's that aspect of observation to observe land and to understand what you can grow. I'm working in southern Ontario right now, so we have full 4 seasons, and it's one plot of land right now. It's on the rock shield, so there's no real soil, but tons of trees. So it's working with the land that you have, how to make soil, how to invest in the soil there, how to bring in chickens and compost and get that sort of biosystem happening. A great documentary is Big Little Farm on Netflix, and aspects, yeah, really knowing the soil and investing in soil. So if you're starting out, soil. start with your soil. 3 acres is tons. It's a lot to grow, especially if you just want to feed yourself and you're not really fully wanting to grow. But invest in yourself, know your local farmers, and get out there and really kind of network with these people and learn, because we're actually generations behind in farming. We're not sitting with these old farmers that have just like every day in the field, 12 hours a day. Like if you really with old school farmers, they will, the mindset and understanding, like it's a grind to really get in their circadian rhythm and with nature and reconnect and understand the sun and why we have solstice and all these sort of, why all these cultures really worship the change of seasons. Like we really need to understand and invest into nature, to really invest, to really understand what's going on. So yeah, there's a lot out there. I mean, I'm for some reason my site's down. I farmmycity.com, and it's changing. It's where I just really teach people all sorts of ways to grow. But there's tons of resources. We're generations behind, so that's kind of why I'm rambling on a bit. We need to really up our game and understanding biodiversity, mycelium, and everything. I think I asked you, Christina.
Yes, hi Scott, Christian. I was listening to your and I was thinking of what do you like, what did your research come out with? Like what's happening with all the existing farming industries, like which are like massively like producing food? Do they like is there major changes happening? Or like what's the general trend or the number one or two trends you see?
Yeah, thank you. The big trend, I'm seeing more convergence of ownership, and then also people wanting to go back to old school ways and realizing, especially, I mean, more my understanding of the Ontario sort of farming industries and going to the Royal Agricultural Fair and how there's still a lot of reliance on petroleum and sort of that sort of not investing in soil. So I'm seeing a lot of people continue along those ways. I'm seeing farming sort of condensing in ownership. We're seeing Bill Gates become this conglomerate owning the most amount of farmland in North America. So there is that, but there is this sort of, we have larger farms now going fully organic or back to like crop rotations. And we're seeing a lot of large farms in Ontario really shifting back and away from sort of the petroleum based farming. So I'm seeing kind of that, the divergence, and then also with these large sort of urban farming and things popping up. So yeah, the larger, I mean, in the last year too, is like a lot of farms got hit hard. And so it's actually kind of really a little too soon to tell how they're going to recover. I mean, even in Canada, they're paying farms not to grow foods this year, and like farmers are protesting, like we cannot, like we're not planting because we can't actually harvest it because we can't get the workers. So it's really in a critical sort of like shape right now, and we're still kind of coming out of it. So it's very interesting times actually. So it's really hard for me to even say like 2 years. It's just from like my, when I just go down the rabbit hole of all the farming stuff and everything I love about farming, it's a very critical time and interesting time for our food system, especially the shipping right now and the mass amount of shipping issues and things happening. So a lot of farmers are really, really worried and don't really know either where it's going.